And his expertise in stepping back from the fray that I find myself into and looking at the big picture in a very credible and mainstream way is one of the things that I truly value about his efforts and approach. Richard has studied history, English, and philosophy as an undergraduate at Alfred University. His deep passion for the discipline of history resulted in a scholarship to study at Oxford University and a near miss on the Rhodes Scholarship. A near miss on the Rhodes Scholarship. Clinton made it, but I think he'd make a better president. He chose instead to do graduate work at the University of Rochester, where he focused on German and Soviet studies before moving on to American Cold War diplomacy. Not wanting to teach, he left academia to write. In '94, he became interested in the UFO problem, approaching it from an angle of history and politics. He was intrigued by the cultural schizophrenia, the fact that mainstream and academic culture, official culture, continued to treat the UFOs as amusement, but so many intelligent people privately had to take it seriously. Throughout 1995 and 96 and 97, he conducted a systematic bibliographic search, hunting down many out-of-print books on UFO documents released over the years through the Freedom of Information Act, and found the amount of information nearly overwhelming. I mean, I find it overwhelming right now, and it's getting more and more overwhelming all the time. The detailed chronology of relevant events was prepared in advance by his writing of a critically acclaimed book, UFOs in the National Security State, Chronology and Cover-Up from 47 to 73. How many people have that in their library? Okay, about a third. Well, you need to, A, read the old book and get prepared for the new book, too, which is coming. This book provides a crucial foundation everyone needs, a clear, comprehensive, but concise historical narrative of the UFO problem, He is now at work on his second volume, which will take the story through the remainder of the 20th century. His talk this afternoon, which is something that I was interested in and guided him toward, was the sociological implications of disclosure. Please help me welcome Mr. Richard Dolan.
Hi. Okay. Is this as high as I can make this thing? I'm just too tall, so I have to bend down like this. That's okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. That was very nice. And I'd like to thank Ryan and the entire Wood family for the work that they've done in preparing this wonderful conference. One thing I just want to state about my interest in this field when I started a little over 10 years ago, I've said this a number of times. I backed into UFO studies. I didn't have a lifelong interest in it, like some people I think have. It was more of one of these things where in 93, 94, I think maybe I felt bored. I felt interested in trying or looking at something else. I stumbled across some UFO information at that time. I remember this well. One of the early things that I remembered looking at was a copy of Timothy Good's Above Top Secret at a bookstore, I think in 94. I had never seen it before. It had been out for a number of years. That's how out of it I was. I thought, wow, what an interesting book. This is dealing with all the kinds of stuff that I've studied as a graduate student. And I remembered reading the very, very famous, for most people here, the Nathan Twining memo of 1947, where he talks about the phenomenon is real, not visionary or fictitious, and so on. And I just had this like wow moment, and I thought, how weird. If this is a top flight general who's in charge of Air Material Command, taking this seriously, talking about this as a real thing, why is this not in any academic history book I ever read? Even if it turned out that the military had a big mistake and it was all some other explanation, why? It would be an interesting part of the history of the Cold War, if nothing else. It's never discussed in any academic treatment of American history. So that little simple naive question, did the U.S. military ever take this seriously? That was my entry point into this field, and that was 11 years ago. And the analogy that I can't get out of my mind is that of the Matrix, with some differences. You know, like in the movie where Neo takes the red pill and all of the reality becomes revealed to him. And in a way that's kind of true with us, but what it really is like in this field is you take the red pill and you realize, wow, there's this whole other set of reality that I've spent my whole life ignoring. And then a couple of years into that, then you realize, oh no, this is really not it either. And you rip that apart, and then you get to the next layer. And then that's good for another year or two, and then you think, oh no, wait, it's even creepier and weirder than this. And there we go. And that's what it's been like for me. I'm not done with that. So it's a wild ride, and I'm very, very far from where the very innocent, simple, naive days, I guess naive comparatively, where I was when I started this. The other thing I just wanted to say is commenting on some of the prior discussions here today, presentations, which I just thought have been outstanding. In particular, I loved what Linda Howe had to say about the DRESS facility in Utah, and just outstanding work. I really would like to commend all of the speakers here, and it's going to be a tough act to follow. Ryan was correct. I'm a big picture sort of person, I guess. And what I would like to do today is to piece together put together a picture, a big picture of this, so that in a sense discuss briefly, very briefly, some of the basic history, and then move into some of the very good reasons why crash retrievals have occurred, what kinds of evidence we actually have for it, and then what it appears we've been doing with that nice material. And then finally, how's it getting paid for? There's a question you don't really ask very much, or get here asked. And what does it mean about our state of affairs in this country today, and what about the road ahead? What are we heading toward? So that's all. Not much, really. Ryan wanted me to talk about the sociological, okay, there we go, and sociological implications of UFOs disclosure. I used to study sociology. Many years ago, I did a very long paper on Max Weber. Some of you know who he is. And I got interested in it. I don't really know what to say about this sociologically. I've got a few sociological comments. Ryan wanted me to say a few other things. They would have been great. I didn't do them all. And I added an "and political," because I just can't avoid that. That's me. I'm going to work off of some of the notes I had in my formal presentation to the conference, which is available, but I've got a few things I'm adding in. So that's it. I feel that this topic that we are dealing with is the most, I call, portentous and complex issue of our era, and that is the UFO issue as in large measure. Because not only are we confronting the reality of a new scientific paradigm, that is the presence on this world of others, okay, that are not officially acknowledged by our paradigm, but also the problem of how their presence may have affected the development of our own society. How would that change our view of ourselves? And what may be the result of acknowledging this reality within the officially sanctioned bodies of power that exist today. So that the problem of UFOs, as we call them, is the most profound social, scientific, and political question I think that we can confront, to my opinion. So I'd like to start, though, with a quick acknowledgement as to why we believe their reality is a given. Most people here probably take it as such, but we can't always be sure. And there are always new people who come in who are wondering why is this such a big deal? I've written about this at length and most prominently in my book, as well as a number of articles. What research by myself and others has made clear is not necessarily that UFOs are definitely of alien origin, although I think this is the case. I think it's strongly the case. But that the phenomenon itself is real, and that it's technological, it's somebody's technology. And that also great levels of secrecy are being maintained over this topic. when I wrote my book, I felt that was enough for a day's work, if I could just make that clear. And the rest we could kind of fill in maybe. Also, ordinary people are being kept in the dark about this, while a select few within the human power elite have gained at least some level of significant knowledge about this. Now, luckily, all these years of denial by the US government were met with a very definitive rebuke in the 1970s when the Freedom of Information Act was given some teeth, and suddenly thousands of pages of documentation on this topic were released to the public, showing that the denial of this, all the FBI, CIA, we don't know nothing about no UFOs, this was an absolute lie. Now, it's true that among the FOIA documents, some of them are on the side there, there's not, in my opinion, a single smoking gun. There's not a single memo that's confirmed among the FOIA documents to say, what are we going to do about all these aliens? But there are a number of documents that are, I call them, one cut below. These are documents that describe utterly awesome encounters by U.S. military people with objects that are clearly being registered and seen and interacted with in kind of confrontational, sometimes provocative ways, doing things that are not supposed to be possible, like zigzagging and stopping and taking off like a bullet, and so on. Objects that don't look normal, either saucer-shaped, for example, or other very non-understandable conventional designs for the time or even for today. And so some of these documents are describing multiple witnesses and then radar plus visual by military. So there are pretty strong cases, and also they do indicate a very serious response by the U.S. military, at least judging from the tone of some of these memos. And after all, who would not take this seriously? If you were in charge of the security at Los Alamos, would you not be concerned about the reality of objects intruding over your airspace that you can't describe, or Hanford Nuclear Facility, or Oak Ridge? Of course you would. Any logical, sensible person would be. The examples are way too many to mention and unnecessary to mention here, but I'm going to give you a couple because there are so many. Some of some of the most amazing are from the 40s and 50s. There's a 1949 memo from Kirtland Air Force Base. States, I'll just read it quickly, AEC, AFSWP, 4th Army, and local commanders perturbed by implications of phenomena. Perturbed by the implications. In this case, the phenomena being airspace violations and at least 100 total sightings that were mentioned in that memo. Or another 1949 document, this one from the FBI, stating that the matter of flying saucers was considered top secret. Or a 1950 memo from the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission plant stating that, quote, objects round in form have been sighted over the Hanford AEC plant, and that Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. Just think, if the public had known in 1950 that that was the case, would this topic have been treated any differently by the academic world and by the scientific community? I think the answer would be yes. Or a 1951 memo from Robins Air Force Base in Georgia describing in utterly fascinating detail a 10-minute UFO encounter by a pilot of an F-51. And the pilot's description of the craft was very, very explicit. He described it as flat on top and bottom and appearing from a front view to have rounded edges and slightly beveled. That's pretty particular. He said the object was solar white, was extremely fast. The pilot said he felt a bump under his plane when the object passed beneath him. He was an experienced World War II fighter pilot, very respected by his peers, and that's what he had to say. Or a 1952 memo to the director of the CIA describing the problem in this manner, quote, sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. That's a picture of the director of CIA at the time, Walter Beadle Smith. He received the memo. Now, these sorts of memos continue throughout the remainder of the 1950s, through the 60s, through the 70s. They become scarce after the 1970s. Is this because the encounters slowed down? No. It's rather that an executive order by President Reagan in 1982 severely curtailed the helpfulness of the Freedom of Information Act, for instance, exempting NORAD entirely, and in general making it a lot more difficult for researchers to get the good stuff. But even so, most UFO documents released through the Freedom of Information Act are not of top secret level anyway. They're mostly of lower levels of secrecy. It's important to point out. Now, there have been a few top secret documents that we have. They've all been entirely redacted, that is censored almost completely, whited out, blacked out, basically useless from an informational point of view. It's important to mention this because, like, for example, I referred to that FBI document that stated the UFO matter was top secret. And yet, where are the top secret documents? Okay? And in keeping in mind that if, let's just assume that a top secret bit of information would have been the extraterrestrial nature of UFOs. Let's say that was top secret. Therefore, in a document labeled secret or confidential or restricted, you wouldn't be allowed to mention or to hint that this is ET. Get it? Those are the only documents we have. So when you get these skeptics who will say, well, you know, there's no proof that these are ET. That's true, but there's also none of the top secret documents are available to us. We only have the material officially, that is, that's of a lower value. It's important to keep in mind, in my view. The one thing that even these documents tell us, though, is that the phenomenon is real, it's technology, it's extraordinary, and it doesn't appear to be ours, at least judging by the nature of these encounters. Now, as a side note, it's useful to recall that not only the U.S. military elite is hiding information on UFOs, because whoever or whatever is behind this doesn't seem to be particularly forthcoming. People around the world are seeing these amazing things in the sky, sometimes frequently out at sea also. And more often than not, they don't tell anyone. Who do you tell if you're just an ordinary person? You see these. I've spoken with hundreds of people by this point, literally hundreds, and they find out that I write UFO books, and then they say, oh my God, let me tell you what I saw last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And frequently they've told almost no one, maybe a friend or a family member, because they don't know where to go, and it's not like the Air Force is going to take their reports anymore. So the most amazing thing that they've ever seen in their life, typically they keep to themselves. We're dealing with this, in other words, in generally an atomized way, without any kind of widespread coordination. I can't see that as a good thing. That doesn't seem like a good thing. People are isolated in their encounters with this. So that, in other words, this is a phenomenon itself that operates by stealth, as I see it. I don't think overall that this intelligence is particularly interested in dialogue or communication with most of us. Now, it's, you know, if you consider testimony from A, people who claim to have been abducted, or B, people who claim to have, let us say, telepathic communication, or who are experiencers or contactees, you can say that, yes, there are some people who are either selected or are able to achieve a communication with these beings. Sure. Overall, I would say that this is a very stealthy phenomenon. By the way, you know, when you try to judge what's the upshot of these communications, I think it's a very mixed bag. I've dealt with very credible people on both sides of that, the abduction side of it that's saying, you know, I had a really nasty time. And then people who said, no, you know, we've had really wonderful communication with these other beings. So it's contradictory, not necessarily contradictory. Maybe there's more than one thing going on, right? What I would caution all of us against is jumping to conclusions right away, at least regarding something that's very difficult to prove yet at this point, in my opinion. But look, this is the whole topic of disclosure is, in my view, about us, not them anyway. That is, how will the process of obtaining official recognition of these others, how will that affect us? And that's the question, at least that's my question today. So to answer this, we need to understand our own civilization. And for 5 decades, most UFO research has barely touched upon this question, other than repeating the most utterly banal platitudes about what we are. in the United States, a country in which the word freedom has morphed into some ideological fetish, utterly divorced from reality, in which fundamental questions of who owns what, for example, is off limits in any national discussion, I think it can be expected that widespread confusion occurs when it comes to analyzing political realities, because we don't deal with true political realities in our national discourse generally. During the 1950s, the UFO researcher and activist Donald Kehoe, believing completely in the functionality of the U.S. representative system of government, he pressed year after year for open congressional hearings on UFOs. After all, it was a free country, he argued, and the public had its logical tool in Congress to get to the bottom of the matter. Those efforts of his failed repeatedly. And so is every following attempt to bring this matter to public recognition via at least the formal political powers. I think with all that, it's time to review some of our assumptions. Because after all, the UFO phenomenon has dropped into the lap of a very definite human social order. Or if you don't want to say dropped into our lap, let's say they've been here all along, we still are perceiving them through a very definite human social order. Now in America, as throughout most of the world, it's a highly stratified order in terms of wealth and power. There's lots of ways to look at this. These are a few of them. They all give the same basic graphic breakdown and the same basic conclusion, which is that America exists as a group of very distinct classes. I've often envisioned America as a group of 100 people. Let's say there's 100 people in this room. And let's say all the money available in this room is $100. So if we were some Marxist communist utopia, we'd all have $1. And we'd all be holding hands, singing Kumbaya. Of course, in our room, though, one person, let's say Ryan, if he's a lucky guy, he'll have, well, anywhere from 33 to 38 of those dollars. Hey, pretty neat. And then the next 19 people after him would get to share, so let's say about 45 of those available dollars. So the last 80 of you would have to share 15 bucks. Of course, even that's not equal because the last 20 of you would have zero, and then the other 60 would have, like on average, about 25 cents net worth. That's how it would be, okay? Now look, I'm not saying this is only America. This is just about every country with variations, certainly, across space and time in our world. I call these four classes, by the way, the owners, managers, worker bees, and expendables. And again, this is not me saying, oh, well, you know, let's change everything, guys. I'm not going there right now. What I'm saying is, whether you think it's a good or bad thing, the important thing is that our little room has a lot of things that make it go. It's got universities, it's got banks, it's got military, it's got intelligence communities, it's got political processes, it's got media, right? So the question arises, who's going to be in the best position to manipulate all those things, those institutions, for his own benefit? And I think we can figure that out pretty straightforward. The question answers itself. It's the person with the $35 who's able to maybe also enlist some of the next level, the managers, to do some work for him too. And that's how it is. And so let's look at our society within that context. The reality of social stratification helps us to understand that there really is no such thing as the media or academia. Rather, there are medias and there are academic niches, each catered to a particular market. There's a huge social chasm between, let's say, the New York Times and the Jim Lehrer NewsHour on the one hand, and your local weekly and cable access programming on the other, or between Harvard and Yale, and then your local community college, right? So not surprisingly, on the issue of UFOs, you have a disconnect between official truth and actual truth. Year after year goes by, and the position of the US government has never wavered. It repeats like a mantra. There's no evidence of UFOs being extraterrestrial or beyond our present scientific knowledge. That no UFO case has ever affected US national security. That's a real lie. That's an especially blatant lie. The national organs of media repeat this year after year. The academic establishment, the big shots, the Harvard and Yale types, also help to stifle public discourse by refusing to admit any legitimacy on this topic. Remember when John Mack at Harvard had the audacity to take this issue on, about 10 years ago, in fact, and got attacked by the attack dogs of his own university at Harvard, and the media as well. They went after him because they recognized this was a person from the inside who was breaking ranks. You know, if he was some community college teacher, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't care as much. Harvard, then you care. Then you have to enforce ideological conformity because that's what ruling elites always have to do. You've got to be ruthless if you want to manage the great unwashed. You know, you're a few people here and you got to manage all these people. You have to be in tune with each other. When someone breaks ranks, you got to squash them. So, and the fact that this topic has no academic support means that anyone who's interested to do this has to rely on their own devices, that is intellectual and financial, to do this. That's not easy. By the way, these photographs of the UFOs, these are all real pictures. The one on the far left to you is an Australian photograph from 2004. Then you've got the Battle of Los Angeles photograph from 1942, an Iranian photograph from 1978, Brazil 1958, and then on the right there is the Belgian triangle of 1990. On the bottom, I just want to mention to you, bottom left, is a triangle. This is a graphic reconstruction by a lady that I know, Canadian citizen. This is over Kingston, Ontario, January 2003. Triangle flew over her car. This individual, I've interviewed her a number of times, ultra reliable in my view. Her report is on the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport. And she's a graphic artist, so she was able to reconstruct that. And then on the bottom is the image of the triangle as it appeared over her car. It was a perfect triangle with sharp edges, she said, not rounded. Silent, kind of large, and blew her mind. Oh, let me just back up. Official, unofficial truth. We got Kennedy and 9/11 up there. And, you know, it amazes me that it's now over 40 years after the Kennedy assassination, and in 2003, Peter Jennings hosted the 40th anniversary kind of commemoration of that, and I think many of us were astonished when he said, and this is going to show you why all the conspiracy theories are wrong. And the disingenuous nature of that documentary, I'm sure some of you saw that, was it was breathtaking. How dishonest that documentary was. 9/11, I've gotten myself in a little bit of trouble from time to time talking about this. Let me just say this. I'm not going to say much more than this. I'm from New York. I spent a lot of time at the Trade Center. My dad worked there. He had the day off. I would say that given the massive contradictions in the official story, in particular what the military said about the attack on the Pentagon, the confiscation of video, and many, many other things that occurred that day, that if this whole thing had happened in, say, Beijing, in China, all right, our nation would be looking collectively at that saying, that looks very suspicious. But it happened here, and so discussion on this is off limits in the public realm to this day. Too loud? Great. Better for me. How's this? Thank you. Now, it is true during the last decade that popular media has at times dealt with this topic of UFOs. Cable TV, get the History Channel, Sci-Fi Channel, and others have done this. Some people take this as a sign that the powers that be are slowly preparing the public for truth. I actually don't buy into that. When I see this topic being handled seriously by the New York Times or the major networks, I'll change my tune. And indeed, I would say the exceptions prove the rule. For example, the ABC special of last year, early 2005, Peter Jennings. Some people hailed this as a breakthrough of the topic into the mainstream. I think perceptive viewers, however, noticed that it steered clear of the issues that really would have made it challenging to official dogma. Roswell was a myth, remember? Area 51 was ignored completely. A lot of time was wasted on the irrelevant efforts of SETI, and so on. And basically, I predicted before it came on that you would have a program that would inflate the balloon for the first hour and deflate it for the second, and that's exactly what happened. So the fact is that to try to pry this topic out of the closet and bring it into widespread public discussion has failed for decades. What does that mean? One thing it should mean is that the major institutions of our society seem quite adamant about controlling this topic in a very certain, safe manner. Now, on a topic as important as this is, there's a fundamental lack of democracy. When ordinary people can't get ordinary answers from their allegedly responsible public officials. What happens in a society when you live a fundamental lie for generation after generation? Well, one thing is that you have obvious winners and losers. Groups who perpetuate the lie have something to gain, in this case access to knowledge, technology, power, money. The rest can sit on their hands waiting for the czar to dispense his goodies to us. The less obvious result is that as knowledge seeps into general population to contradict these lies, confidence in your government will wane, at least for those who have the desire to think about this. For those who obstinately deny again and again that this is anything significant, they're going to have to live with more and more cognitive dissonance. I think that some enterprising psychologists or therapists should really write about the national cognitive dissonance that Americans are living in. I think it'd be a very interesting topic. So that the question of UFO disclosure cannot be divorced from issues of politics and power. For one thing, it does matter if you're trying to get disclosure from a fundamentally democratic regime or a politically repressive structure like an authoritarian one. Another thing, it's worth asking how disclosure might affect the global infrastructure that is clearly teetering right now. Also, whether the current crop of crises will serve to hasten or impede disclosure. I want to end this topic on that theme, in fact. There's one other question to keep in mind, and does it matter that the presence of this apparent non-human intelligence is happening now when our civilization is in a state of major crisis? For surely we are in one right now. Now here's where the story becomes a little more interesting, and the evidence is a little less cut and dry. In ufology, I've always felt and said that you have to distinguish between what you absolutely know and what you think you know. And there's nothing wrong with speculating as long as you are clear that it is, and don't pretend that your speculations are knowledge. What we know is kind of some of the things I've been saying, that the U.S. military encounters these things, and other militaries do as well, and that this appears to them to be technological and not us and so forth. Okay? You can't reasonably counter those points. It's fair to say that we know it. Beyond that bare bones state of affairs, a few other things look pretty clear. Okay? I'm not going to say that I know, but I'm going to say this is what it looks like with, I would say, way more than 95% likelihood. And this is regarding the acquisition of alien technology and bodies. And immediately, some people would ask, okay, well, great, what's the evidence for that claim? There's an even better question, though, and that question would be a little less lawyerly, a little more nuanced. And the question would be, on what basis do we make such a claim? Because evidence is important, but so is logic. Okay? It is logical to deduce on the basis of UFO reports that there's someone else doing this. For the sake of caution, you can call it an intelligence not from our civilization. For the sake of convenience, you can call him alien, which is what I think we can do. We have a large body of testimony from officials, scientists, other responsible people leading us to believe that some of this alien hardware and even bodies are secretly being held right now. Yeah, it would be nice to have a piece to show you. I don't have that, but the sheer quantity and quality of these witnesses force us to confront this and to consider its probability of being true. These four things: hardware, bodies, programs, money. This is what's being hidden. And the knowledge, that's Pine Gap in the bottom left there in Australia. Oh, and the hardware, that's a photograph that was taken by Gary Schultz just outside Area 51 in 1990. Now, for example, the body of testimony collected by Leonard Stringfield during the late 70s and early 1980s. Stringfield became kind of like a one-man clearinghouse of leaked testimony from more than 30 direct sources and another 30 or so intermediaries. These are for people, either the original person, either deceased or was afraid to talk to him directly. Now, Stringfield was cautious about the information he got. He wasn't a rube. He was a very intelligent, sophisticated man. He honored the requests for confidentiality. Some people criticized him for that, but that's what he did. And he wondered if he was being played in some kind of disinformation scam, but he didn't believe he was. Overall, he did not. Some of these sources, these are just a few. A woman whose husband was in Air Force at Wright-Patterson in 1973. The man told his wife he'd been blindfolded and taken to a secure location. There he saw high-ranking officers and a few scientists who were viewing 3 small humanoid bodies. His job was to stand guard. He said that they had large heads and were about 3 feet tall. He got word of a 1948 crash from what he called a well-informed military source. The informant had heard from other inside military sources that a metallic disc had crashed somewhere in a desert region. The only details indicated that the craft suffered severe damage on impact and was retrieved by military units. Direct investigation of, incredibly enough, an alleged shooting of an alien at Fort Dix, McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey in 1978. This was also investigated by Richard Hall and Air Force Major George Filer. Filer was assigned to the facility at the time, in fact. A former Air Force sergeant who discussed the retrieval of an alien craft in the southwestern U.S. in 1957 and humanoid occupants being maintained at Wright-Pat. An incident at Nellis Air Force Base in 1968, a man claimed he had been shown a top-secret memo by a general who in fact was the father of his girlfriend. The memo stated that a large UFO had hovered over Nellis for 3 days, that 3 small craft came out of the main craft, one of which landed on Air Base grounds. A colonel and security detachment were sent to greet it. A short and stocky, that's a quote, humanoid disembarked. A beam of light was directed at the colonel, who was instantly paralyzed. The security team fired on the aliens, but their weapons jammed. The colonel was hospitalized and could only recall the event in terms of mathematics, as though an attempt of communication was conducted in this manner. The UFO retreated to its parent craft and left. Stringfield did successfully confirm the existence of the general, and obtained additional corroborative information about this incident. Another person who contacted Stringfield about a crash retrieval in 1978. Stringfield had written a book recently, and that book had convinced the man, he said, quote, that I should tell my story to you about a UFO that landed or maybe crashed at Fort Riley, Kansas. Oh, the crash was not in 78. The crash was in 64. I beg your pardon. Stringfield determined that it was December 10th, 1964, and he checked with an intelligence source who also was aware of that incident, he said. And then finally, Stringfield's son-in-law informed him he had spoken with a person who had witnessed alleged alien humanoids at Wright-Pat in 1966. Stringfield met with this man, who had been in military intelligence. The man claimed to have seen 9 dead aliens preserved in deep freeze conditions. They were about 4 feet tall. He had been told that there was a total of 30 alien bodies at the base. He did not see a craft, but was told that there was a craft there too. He said to Stringfield that, quote, at certain military bases, highly trained mobile units were in a constant ready state for dispatch to any area in the USA to recover downed or crashed UFOs. Also that since 1948, secret information concerning UFO activity involving U.S. military has been contained in a computer center at Wright-Patterson. At this base, a master file written in computer language is maintained with duplicate support backup files secreted at other military installations, and so on. Stringfield collected many of these. This is just a little bit. Other people have spoken out too. You have a statement by Canadian government official and engineer Wilbert Smith of conversations he had with leading American scientists about the reality of crash retrievals and alien beings. This is back in 1950. This was confirmed many years later. After Smith died, his papers were collected and his handwritten notes mentioning, among others, Robert Sarbacher, who was present at these conversations. Sarbacher was alive in the 1980s and was contacted and conceded that, yes, he had been peripherally, he said, involved in a government program to study this technology. He named more names, such as Vannevar Bush and Robert Oppenheimer. He said, and also John Neumann, the mathematician. He said, certain materials reported to have come from flying saucer crashes were extremely light and very tough. I'm sure our laboratories analyzed them very carefully. He also repeated the scuttlebutt that some of these aliens appeared to be insect-like in their physical structure. There are several statements from the late U.S. Senator Barry Goldwater. Goldwater, of course, was a nominee for the presidency in 1964. He was a very good friend of Curtis LeMay, Air Force Chief of Staff. Nevertheless, was rebuffed, cussed out, actually, in one of his letters, he said, by LeMay in his attempts to gain access to the so-called Blue Room at Wright-Patterson, where the bodies were rumored to be. In 1975, Goldwater wrote, about 10 or 12 years ago, I made an effort to find out what was in the building at Wright-Patterson, where the information is stored that has been collected by the Air Force, and I was understandably denied this request. It is still classified above top secret. In 1981, Goldwater wrote, this thing has gotten so highly classified, even though I will admit there is a lot of it that has been released, and he was referring to the then recent Freedom of Information Act flurry that had come out. He still said, it is just impossible to get anything on it. Now, this man was a senator. He ran for the presidency. He can't get jack divided by squat about this. You have statements by the former head of Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich. Skunk Works, of course, was and remains probably the most elite of all known aerospace organizations in the world. I say known. In July 1985, Ben Rich wrote a handwritten note in reply to a question by John Andrews, a friend and an associate of his. And indeed, Andrews was one of Lockheed's leading engineers and a chief model kit designer for the Testor Corporation. Andrews wrote to Rich. This is what John Andrews wrote, and I don't have that up here, but just listen here. He said, the topic is UFO. I believe that there are lots of UFOs. I am also tending to believe they are of two categories. A, man-made UFOs, B, extraterrestrial UFOs. I believe with certainty in man-made UFOs. I am tending to believe there are also extraterrestrial UFOs. This is still Andrews writing. Having the highest respect for both you and Kelly Johnson, I'd appreciate knowing if your belief covers category B as well as the obvious category A of the above. Purpose of question, precision. Now, Andrews' letter continued with a very interesting statement. He said, Dr. Sarbacher's response was, without a question, a statement in his belief in Category B. Do you also include Category B, Ben? That's a very interesting reference. I mean, it was less than 2 years since Sarbacher had wrote his letter verifying his own involvement in this. I think word got around rather quickly in the aviation community. So Ben Rich's reply was relatively short, a little bit vague too, actually, but nonetheless very suggestive. And Ben Rich said, yes, I'm a believer in both categories. I feel everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs are unfunded opportunities, UFO, right? Underlined. In both categories, there are lots of books and charlatans. Be careful. Now, it could be that Ben Rich was expressing only belief, I suppose, not knowledge, that both categories were real. On the other hand, it's at least conceivable that he would not wish to make such a statement so nakedly in a signed letter. Caution, circumspection, deniability, are never far from one's mind in circles such as those occupied by Ben Rich. Many of us know such people. We know how they talk. So Andrew's question to him was about as point blank as you could be, including the reference to Sarbacher, and Ben Rich did not back away. The reference to unfunded opportunities, by the way, is also interesting. I think, is this a wink at crash retrievals or some form of technological freebie? I think so. 8 years later, 1993, Rich spoke at the UCLA School of Engineering Alumni Association. According to one of the attendees, an IBM executive and MUFON member, Jan Harzen, who was there, Rich gave a fairly standard history of skunk works, but ended his presentation with the captivating statement, "We now have the technology to take ET home." And then he ended. Can you imagine ending it on that? Some people who have no curiosity about anything in this world, they left. But some people stayed behind. Circled Rich and said, "Come on, give us more." And so they talked. And according to Jan, they asked if he would expand his statement. And his verbatim statements are as follows. He says, "We now know how to travel to the stars. There is an error in the equations, and we figured it out. And we now know how to travel to the stars, and it won't take a lifetime to do it. It's time to end all the secrecy on this, as it no longer poses a national security threat, and make the technology available for use in the private sector." And then the last statement, which was a paraphrase, was that there are many in the intelligence community who would like to see this stay in the black and not see the light of day. Incidentally, according to aviation journalist Nick Cook, from his book The Hunt for Zero Point, Ben Rich once told him of a place where ideas that were too dangerous to transpose into hardware were locked away forever, like the Ark of the Covenant in the final scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Is this a hint at acquired crash retrieval technology? Then, of course, you have statements by Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He has on several occasions now spoken publicly in this vein. Let's be clear, Dr. Mitchell has never said that he has seen bodies. He's never said that he has seen the UFO. What he has said is that he has a number of elite connections who confirmed this to him, and he believes them. He most recently said this, to my knowledge, in Roswell in July of 2004. I was there. Edgar Mitchell was a sixth man to walk on the moon. When you walk on the moon, who's not going to want to be your friend? All right, he can basically talk to anyone he wants to talk to, I think. So these are very, very distinguished individuals. One of them said to him, was in charge of studying very, very elite deep black R&D technology programs, and stumbled across this program, which was to study alien technology and bodies, and basically wondered, why am I not running this? Knocked on enough doors and was told, "Sorry, sir, you don't have a need to know." So he was annoyed. He went complaining to Mitchell, but that was about apparently all he could do. So taken individually, statements from people like Ben Rich or Barry Goldwater or Edgar Mitchell or any of Leonard Stringfield's sources or many others I didn't even mention, you could dismiss them, I suppose, if you felt like it, or could at best keep them in your gray basket, I suppose, as in kind of intellectual limbo. But it's very hard to deny their cumulative power, I think, and in particular when you judge the quality of these people who are making these statements. Enough smoke is appearing. Where's the fire? Well, maybe some of the fires in Southern California and across the wastes of Nevada and probably out in Utah and a number of other places. Indeed, many other places. Now, I remember when Bob Lazar was kind of a fresh thing. I started in '94 doing this, and Lazar was only publicly known for about 5 years. It amazes me that it's almost 20 years later now, and people are still arguing about Bob Lazar. He's been called everything from a hero to an outright fraud, and everything in between. But I would say let's keep in mind that Bob Lazar was not the first nor the last to have made such claims of reverse engineering alien technology. For instance, we have the testimony of James Goodall, aviation journalist. He wrote several books on black world technology. He wrote for Jane's Defense Weekly, Aviation Week, and Space Technology, and others. Throughout the 1980s, before Lazar was public or involved in this, Goodall conducted many direct interviews with insiders regarding programs at Nevada's Groom Lake facility. According to Goodall, at that time, there were at least 8 black programs there, not counting the B-2 or other conventional types of aircraft. At least 2 of these were very high-speed aircraft, being reported at least since 1982. One was a small and extremely fast, it was Mach 4 to Mach 6. Another was very large and was tracked many times by the FAA, flying through controlled airspace at speeds as high as 10,000 miles per hour from 1986 onward. Another craft at Groom Lake was a stealth, low electronic observable flying triangle, designed to fly very high, very slowly, and quietly. And then during the 1990s, at Southern California's Plant 42, that's a government-owned, contractor-operated facility with many production sites for very advanced aircraft. You have sightings of silent triangular aircraft beginning to be reported. These triangles were being launched from there. One of Goodall's contacts had over a decade of experience at Groom Lake. During the mid-1980s, Goodall asked him, "Do you believe in UFOs?" The answer was absolutely, positively, they do exist. He asked, "Could you expand on this, please?" And the guy said, "No, sorry." A year later, this same person confided to Goodall that, quote, "We have things in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious." But he said, "I wouldn't be able to tell any more until the year 2025. It was 40 years after they were having this discussion. Another of Goodall's informants, a chief master sergeant with 3 tours at Groom Lake, told him in the mid-1980s that we have things out there that are literally out of this world, better than Star Trek or anything you can see in the movies. He would not expand on that statement. A great deal of alleged insider testimonies have reached the world via other researchers and journalists: George Knapp, Norio Hayakawa, Bill Hamilton, many others. This testimony suggests there is a great deal of very advanced aviation technology, not only at Groom Lake in southern Nevada, but also in Southern California's Antelope Valley, dubbed by some Aviation Valley, for its heavy concentration of military and defense contractor facilities. Near the towns of Rosamond, Palmdale, and Lancaster are 3 mysterious underground facilities operated as early as the 1980s by Northrop, Lockheed, and McDonnell Douglas. The Northrop facility is located near the Tehachapi Mountains. There are rumors that it goes down as many as 42 levels. That there are 42 levels. That there are tunnels linking it with other underground facilities in the area. There have been many reports of strange flying objects in the vicinity of many shapes and sizes: spherical, triangular, elongated, boomerang, disc-shaped, small and large. This facility has runways that are not exactly seem to be runways for any ordinary aircraft. They have diamond-shaped openings through which huge pylons with strangely shaped objects mounted on them are raised to the surface. These objects sometimes look like, I should have had a picture on here. Some of you have seen it, I think. They look like elongated discs or flying saucers that have been seen to glow and change colors there. Glowing spheres have been seen by people at the area in night. The nature and function of the spheres, as far as I know, is unknown. Similar descriptions apply to the McDonnell Douglas facility and the Lockheed installation. It's just north of Helendale, California. And the Lockheed facility has a very obvious underground entrance. There's something odd and unacknowledged that has long been going on at places like these, and indeed at Norton Air Force Base, also in Southern California. Up to 4 people claim to have seen an alien reproduction vehicle in an enormous hangar in November 1988. These claims were made on a call-in radio show. One of the individuals, Mark McCandlish, has given his testimony to the Disclosure Project. According to McCandlish, he's a science writer, his friend Brad Sorensen was attending an air show at Norton Air Force Base that day, November 12th. Sorensen was with an exceedingly well-connected friend, has been rumored to be former Secretary of Defense Frank Carlucci. Whoever it was, this friend told Sorensen, "Follow me." Hey. And they walked to an airfield away from the crowds. They arrived at an enormous hangar, were brought inside, where a private exhibit was at the same time being held for politicians and cleared military personnel. They saw many highly advanced aircraft, one of the B-2 prototypes, in fact. Behind the black curtain, however, that divided the hangar was something even more exotic. And Sorensen was very explicit when he told McCandlish about this. He said, quote, 3 flying saucers floating off the floor. No cables suspended them from the ceiling, holding them up. No landing gear underneath, just floating, hovering above the floor. He said there were small exhibits with videotape running, showing one of the vehicles in a desert making short, quick hopping motions, and then accelerating straight up and out of sight in complete silence. Again, this is 1988. We have the number of witness testimony. I mean, you can just go on and on and on and on. I feel that the Disclosure Project that had the press conference in May of 2001 was a very significant event in this. You have numerous individuals, many senior officers who talk about gravity research, anti-gravity chambers, alien reproduction of vehicles, kind of illegal private groups that are basically managing all of this. This was one of the best attended press conferences that the press club had, and there was, a little bit of media. It's true. They got some media attention the next day. But where was Aviation Week and Space Technology? Where was Jane's Defense Weekly? They never discussed this. Completely off their radar. Even to debunk it, even to criticize it, even to laugh it away. No, they left it alone. Now, there's no question that new technology, significant new technology, has been developed for several decades now, and which continues to be unacknowledged to this day. So, the gap between official, I was happy to coin this little concept of official truth and unofficial truth. And the gap between official truth and unofficial truth is only going to continue to widen as long as the powers that be don't recognize this. However, history shows us that change is inevitable, even in the field of UFOs, even in the realm of government disclosure. There is a discernible pattern across nations, across many decades, relating to major political crises or transition periods and the release of sensitive information relating to UFOs. In the US, following Vietnam and following Watergate, when Congress sought to take back some power that had been wrested from it by the executive, what happened? They drove the president from office, reopened investigations on the assassinations of JFK and Martin Luther King, held hearings on excesses of the CIA. An important part of this flurry of populist activism was the strengthening of the Freedom of Information Act, which led directly to the release of thousands of pages of documents on UFOs. There is a direct connection, in my view, to this. Now, it's true that the initial hope of UFO researchers that this would lead to the crashing of the secrecy wall, that did not happen. But there is no question that the release of these documents has made an important difference in helping us to reclaim our lost history. Other national crises have similarly led to the release of substantial amounts of UFO documentation. The death of Spanish dictator Francisco Franco in 1975 led to, within a year, the release of hundreds of pages of Spanish military UFO reports. Death of Mao in China in 1976, similar thing. The collapse of Soviet power in late 1980s and early 90s led to the release of an enormous amount of Soviet military UFO information. We are now, what about today, in the 21st century? Well, it is my contention that we are approaching a similar crisis. We have a nation that is going fiscally bankrupt due to unmanageable foreign engagements that it cannot afford. You have the situation that has developed after years of obvious high-level criminality at the highest levels of power, and the public is starting to move on this. And I think it's entirely possible that there's going to be a backlash to some extent. And there very well could be insiders who have access to something sensitive, and this might be an opportunity to release it. I'm not saying it will happen, I'm saying it might happen, and keep your eyes open for it. Now, the problem with the release of more information is that there's not a lot of leeway left anymore. A lot's been released. How much more can be released? You can't be half pregnant, you can't half disclose. If George W. Bush were to say to everyone, well, okay, yeah, aliens appear to be here, what then? Well, you got a whole, witch's brew of follow-up questions here that are not going to go away very easily. You have people who are going to be concerned about abductions. You're going to be people who are wondering, hey, do you actually have underground bases then? And then you're going to have people who may panic. I spoke to a woman a couple of weeks ago. I was out with my kids at the library, ran into this person, we chatted. She said, what do you do? I said, I do UFOs. And she was interested, but on a purely intellectual basis. Once, she realized that I believed that it was real, she got scared, and she actually said, I don't think you should really do this. I don't think you should tell people about this. She got scared, and she was an intelligent person. But I do think panic would subside. I don't think that's the real issue. I think the real issue, from a domestic political point of view would be things like this. I mean, think about the fact that you have a topic that has clearly involved a lot of human energy and a lot of money to research, and you have a federal budget for fiscal year 2006 that's $2.5 trillion. Go through that budget, I would imagine that we wouldn't find anything listed for UFO research officially, right? But there's got to be money going to this. Where's the money going to? Well, 15 years ago, Tim Weiner wrote a book called Blank Check, which was about the then black budget. And Weiner said this is basically a part of federal spending that's classified. And he estimated it at about $30 billion. Well, first of all, that's very low. Secondly, that's really not the true black budget. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this visual here. Right before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld was talking to Congress. There's a lot of missing money in the Pentagon, apparently. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. The Pentagon budget at that time was about $350 billion. Where the hell did this money come from, and where did it go? Huh? I think I have an idea. Rumsfeld said, by the way, well, I'm going to have to look into this, and I'll get back to you. Then came 9/11, and that question's off the record. Now, there's lots of ways to look at this money because this is complicated stuff. By one record, the fiscal year 2000 Pentagon budget had, according to the GAO, undocumentable expenditures of about $1.1 trillion for that fiscal year. And that's 3 times its budget. Even that is amazing. So the question is, where did the money come from? Well, one lady that I'm really a big fan of is this person here, Catherine Austin Fitts. She was number 2 at HUD under George Bush Sr., the Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She has a website. I encourage you to visit it. She is probably the most perceptive writer on the black budget writing in the world today. I want to read this quote out loud. The solution to continued growth and funding of the black budget may have been to steal as much money and assets as possible from the federal budget and then to move the black budget on budget. That is to make it official. One control of media, Congress, Justice, SEC, ensure that the legal budget was non-transparent. That means you can't look at it. Controlled by private government contractors and could not be harmed or fiddled with by Congress. She talked about the disappearance of over $3.3 trillion from the federal government between 98 and 2001. That's the final years of President Clinton. Okay? Read her article, What's Up with the Black Budget? And that she talks about UFO, by the way. We're moving toward a very, very scary world. Doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities here for us. What it means is that some of this alien technology, I am assuming, has gone into maybe some of the technology that we may be dealing with here, that is turning our life into the real-life version of Big Brother 1984. 21st century version. Okay, you can look at some of those. You don't need me to go off of them. But we're moving toward an embedded microchipped population where you can be tracked 24/7. Everything you do. The city of Baltimore about a year ago made an announcement that they were going to get 24-hour video surveillance cameras in public places. Yeah, that's a great idea. The restriction of access to scientific information by the Bush administration has been complained about by many top-level scientists. And as I think somebody mentioned in the talk yesterday, this information is becoming more and more unavailable to leading scientists. Information is becoming classified. And then the police state things that are going on, moving people to Guantanamo and just disappearing them. The privatization of the U.S. military, I think, is interesting here. And also, when you consider that, you consider privatization of the UFO information and technology. Who's going to control the technology of the future? I don't think it's going to be you and me. The teleportation technology, the DNA computers that can, blow away the current computers we have now. Are we all going to have access to this stuff? I see that as a very difficult issue because it would require a loss in power by those people who have great power. So what we're moving toward is a real crisis. We're moving toward either a situation where we will truly be living in a modern fascist state, or if enough momentum can be gathered to fight that and destroy the structures of power that are crushing us or threatening to crush us right now. That's the problem that we're dealing with. Now, you know, how much time do I have left here? 8 minutes. Oh, wow, great. Plus questions and answers. Okay, I went a little bit too fast, actually. I'm going to end this with a really creepy picture. Forgive me. Forgive the cliche. I realize that others may not all look like that. I think some of them look like that. But one thing that I'm showing this because what will they add to the mix if their acknowledgement ever becomes public? This is a question I don't really have the full answer to. I don't think any of us really does. There are people who say that they do. I'm a little more cautious, I have to say. I had a fascinating series of discussions with some people even in the day that I've been here, and one of which included the likelihood that we've been, created by them all along, and that, as Charles Fort famously wrote, we are property. What if that's true? What if we are their property and they kind of developed us, right, for purposes unknown? And what if there are factions out there? And what if they don't like each other? There's a lot going on here, and it's not hard to have some sympathy at certain levels to people who may have these secrets. I mean, what if one of the answers to alien technology meant that we would all have free energy, as people like Stephen Greer and others have argued. We could have free energy. Well, you could ask, would that actually be a utopia? Look at us. Look at us. Do you want your neighbor to have free energy? If that meant that in addition to fueling his or her house, they could also make a really great bomb? What if the knowledge couldn't be contained and people could do really bad things with that free energy? Could people be trusted without the imposition of a true totalitarian system over the lives of all of us? Now, there's that question. On the other hand, I look back over the history of secrecy in general, and the counter to that I see is, well, in instances that I know about government secrecy, secrets that have escaped, it always seems to be the case that the secrets are kept for utterly selfish, self-aggrandizing reasons. So I'm not inclined to trust the motives of the secret keepers on principle. I think that there are groups that are absolutely benefiting from the acquisition of this technology. I also believe that we are truly living in a kind of matrix-like world. That is, that the actual reality is so far beyond the official sanitized nonsense that we're fed 24/7, that it's almost unrecognizable. This is what I think is the case. And for that reason, I encourage people to unplug your TV. I unplugged my cable. I have no cable TV. And as I told a few people, it was difficult to get this lady to agree to have me unplug my cable. I called up the cable people, and I said, I don't want this anymore. And she said, well, all right, sir, do you mind if I ask why? And I said, well, yeah, I'm just tired of it. Tired of paying money for a lot of commercials and crap I don't want to say. So I said, I think I did use that. So thank you. So she said, well, sir, what will you do when you need entertainment? Which, it's hard to make me speechless. That kept me speechless. I didn't really. She made me feel like we were breaking up. Like she was my girlfriend and I wasn't going to see her anymore. This is the kind of guilt trip they throw on you. But I did unplug, and believe it or not, there's great life without cable TV. I encourage, and the reason I say this is that, very simply, there was a study done during the first Gulf War, 91, of the relationship of TV news, how much TV news you watched and how well you understood the issues of the Gulf War, done by the University of Colorado, I believe. And what they found, to their shock and horror, was that there was an inverse relationship between the amount of TV news you watched and how well you understood the basic issues, like where was Jordan on a map, Or what did then President Bush mean by no linkage? Remember that, no linkage? So that the more TV, more CNN, all right, that you watch, the less likely you were to know this. And this was decried as a great failure of American media to inform the public, blah, 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 blah. To which I would say, no, yes, total success. The whole point isn't to educate you, it's to make you think you're being educated and to pacify you and to sell you to the advertisers. We all kind of know this, but sometimes we forget because we get into the TV zone. And this is, I think, one of the primary tools for control over all of us. And I encourage all of us to pull the plug. And that's one step to freedom. The last thing I want to say regarding the intentions of them. Some believe they know this answer. I'm not one. I don't believe that I know this answer. I have some ideas. All of us have some ideas, and ideas are great. Let's keep sharing the ideas. But I do not believe that the path towards uncovering the truth is best served by asserting unprovable and unfalsifiable claims as factual assertions that do not need to be backed up any longer. And in my view, this is what all claims on alien intentions are. We can put a lot of pieces together and give ourselves a very good idea about what things look like. But I do believe that we are fools if we conclude that we therefore have knowledge. I encourage all of us to learn how to be comfortable with some uncertainty on this and some other issues. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable with uncertainty. Okay, thank you. Questions? Thank you. We do have time for some questions. Yes, sir, and I'll repeat the questions.
My name is Mark Hunsaker, and I'm a television addict recovering.
Good for you, sir.
About 8 years now. I
Excellent.
unplugged. I think it's really important what you said. The other thing is that I produce for television in LA. It gives me the feeling like I kind of produce commercial ads for a tobacco company and selling smoking. So I would advise you to think about unplugging. Vitally important.
There's always great programming. It's not like there's nothing good that you can watch, but the problem is it comes with the commercials. And if you can just get your DVDs or your videos and watch it selectively, I think that's fine. I mean, I've gotten copies of lots of great documentaries, and including many UFO documentaries, and that's great. But the commercialization. I have 2 young kids. I have a son who's 9. I have a daughter who's 7, and I'm astonished, like Nickelodeon. That I'm sure some of you know what I mean. It's unbelievable the constant pimping of products and culture that really is, I think, designed to shut your brain right off. Any other questions? Yes.
Again, getting back to the TV end of it, you mentioned earlier Peter Jennings and how he handled the UFO question. What I wanted to ask was, what's your impression of History Channel's UFO files from when they first started showing their so-called documentaries at the time, and compared to what they're doing now, where they're more trying to answer the question instead of trying to explain it away with some cockamamie debunking idea.
The question is, what do I think about the trends of History Channel documentaries? And I've been on some of them, but some of them I'm happy with, and some of which I really didn't care for. I think, overall, History Channel has done an okay job recently in some of the UFO documentaries they've done. I think some of them have been pretty good. The ones that have me speaking a lot are my favorite, But no, but seriously, to the extent that they are willing to challenge official dogma about things like cover-ups, then I'm happy. I'm happy with that. And I do think the History Channel has made some efforts. I mean, they've had some pretty good programming. I mean, look, I don't think that we have a monolithic structure that we're dealing with. I think one thing that UFO activists should try to do is seek out allies. There are always voices that are willing to go against the main current. But now the thing with History Channel is that they're not NBC, okay? They're not ABC or CBS. They're still cable. And so it's my belief. Or they're not the Jim Lehrer NewsHour. They're not the New York Times. They're a lower level of media on this structure that I was trying to deal with as far as like the hierarchical class structure. It's not that I'm even a Marxist. I mean, I've read all that stuff. But the point is that their market is not the same market as the true elite. They're one cut below. I think that when I see NBC do documentaries of the kind that the History Channel do, then I will start to think that there's something going on. Yes, sir.
I think the government, or to what extent is the government controlling the news media?
To what extent is the government controlling the news media? Well, we know that they control it to some extent, and that the media control them to some extent. They're kind of in bed with each other. It's hard to extract them from each other. I would recommend a great documentary recently done called Orwell Rolls in His Grave. Has anyone seen this? Heard of it? A couple of people. It's awesome. And it's an outstanding analysis of contemporary media. Orwell Rolls in His Grave. It's fairly recent. And Outfox is another very good one. That's a very good one, yes. Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism, I think is the subtitle.
Where do you get these?
Probably Amazon. Probably can buy them at this point. Library, yeah. Outfox is at my local library. Anyway, the point is, does media control government or government control media? Well, look, I mean, 30 years ago, Congress investigated this. One thing they looked into, one revelation that came out was that there were hundreds of American journalists that had been secretly on the payroll of the CIA for years. No one knew. And they were patriotic Americans, but sometimes they were planning fake stories on behalf of the agency. And ask yourself what you personally could do if you had 400 informants working for you in mainstream journalism. Could you control the media totally? Well, maybe not, but could you influence it and influence editorial policy, kill certain stories you want to kill? Right? Yes, absolutely. I think that's what they did. There was another hand. One more? Okay, sir. Yes.
George Clooney's recent movie,
Okay.
I highly recommend it. Will tell you what's going on.
Which movie is that? Which is the George Clooney?
Good night and good luck.
What?
Good night, good luck.
Good night, good luck?
Good night,
Okay.
control of the media by
If
the
you watch the
government.
movie theater, you'd see the previews for it.
Hold on, this gentleman had a question.
If the alien scenario is taking place, what impact with the government does it play with religion? How important is that really to suppressing information, the whole structure of society and morality and so forth?
The question is, how will the alien revelations change our attitudes about religion, and will that cause society to come crashing down? Well, I don't think it would cause society to come crashing down. A lot of people are attached to their religious beliefs. That's true, but I've never had a lot of sympathy for this argument. Other people have more than I do. In other words, for we have to protect people's religious sensibilities. I'm sorry, but it doesn't have a lot of resonance with me. Maybe I'm missing something here. I've always felt that the primary motivations for secrecy have to do with money and power. Now, religion is a great tool to exercise power. Everyone knows that. And so it works its way in to the bigger picture. I think, look, there's adult ways of having spiritual sensibilities, and there's the ways of the 5-year-old. And most Americans, frankly, choose the way of the 5-year-old. And so if you want to look at it that way, maybe that would be a good thing, not a bad thing. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'll talk to you later.
Tremendous. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. That was wonderful.